A new Prime Minister and a scaled-down cabinet. Here's a look at Prime Minister Carney's new cabinet, made up of 23 ministers plus the Prime Minister. There are some new faces entering cabinet, 3 of them to be exact, but many familiar faces are exiting cabinet. 18 ministers from Prime Minister Trudeau's last cabinet shuffle aren't returning. Some who've already said they aren't running again in the next election, but others who are planning to run. And among those is former leadership contender Karina Gould. Now, one of the familiar faces in Mark Carney's cabinet is Minister Gary Anandasangaree, who joins us now. Minister, welcome. You've kept your old job and you've added Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thank you, and good to be back.
This is about change today. How is this government really any different than the Trudeau government?
This is a new government with new leadership. Mark Carney is the person who is going to lead us through the turbulent times that is before us. We are facing an existential threat from the United States, and I believe that Mark Carney has worked his entire life to meet this moment. He has maneuvered 2 major economic challenges in Canada in 2008 and Brexit in the United Kingdom. He is internationally respected, and I think Canadians need leadership right now that is very much focused on the economy, very much focused on ensuring that the impacts of the tariffs are limited, but at the same time building the economy, the new economy that Canadians deserve.
But the Prime Minister is different. The cabinet has been shuffled, but the caucus is identical to what it was when Justin Trudeau resigned in January 6th. So beyond the boss being different, how is the government different today?
I think the direction and the leadership that's provided by this particular Prime Minister is different. I'm a staunch supporter of Prime Minister Trudeau, and I have been until the last days. At the same time, I think Prime Minister Carney offers a fresh new perspective that's going to meet the challenges that's in front of us today. He has put together a cabinet, slimmed down cabinet that is very laser sharp, focused on the economy, what needs to happen in order to protect jobs and protect the middle class, and to make sure that Canadians are taken care of. People are worried. Families are in serious discussions at their kitchen table, talking about how they hold on to their jobs or balance their books. And this is a moment where, with the threats looming and continue to have uncertainty, you need leadership that is laser sharp focus on the economy.
Right. It is a slimmed down cabinet. It's down to 24, including the Prime Minister. It was 37 under Prime Minister Trudeau, including the Prime Minister. But gone from the roster of portfolios are things like a minister responsible for diversity, for status of women, for seniors. I mean, what signal does that send to Canadians? Because Jagmeet Singh has suggested this shows none of that matters to Prime Minister Carney.
I think the way I look at this is that essentially now every minister is responsible for everything, right? So while there may be particular focus, so if I'm the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, and while my focus may be, on overall issues of justice, I too have a responsibility to ensure that those who are most marginalized are supported, whether it's through online harms, where disproportionately Jewish and Muslim Canadians may be impacted, or women. It is my responsibility as a Minister of Justice to take care and to address those issues within the portfolio. And of course, within the broader expanded portfolios, they are included as part of the task of the minister. Make no mistake, our party and our government is very much grounded on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We believe in fundamental rights and equality, sure. And we will continue to focus on those things, but with the view that economic uncertainty is the overpowering issue of the day, and we will do this in a manner that ensures that our economy is built. At the same time, those in the margins are also taken care of.
Right, but included, but not the core focus, right? Like focus on disabilities and multiculturalism. I mean, there may be some. I have no idea if the cabinet could grow from this. Should Mark Carney and the Liberals win the next election? But it was a signal your government tried to send in the past or the Trudeau government tried to send in the past, that representation matters and a focus on these issues matter. What do you say to advocates who are going to be disappointed and are disappointed this is gone?
Look, I've worked my entire life on the notion that representation matters, who's at the table matters, and representation needs to be at every sphere of government. And I think that's where we are today. We are, the work that we've done in the last 10 years, I think, built us to a point where, most departments, we have a overall perspective of GBV in all of our decision making. Every cabinet document that we see has that embedded. So it was very much, I think, a continuation and building from where we were. What is important today is that a focus on the economy is critical, and in order to have a long-term economy that works for everyone, we need to focus on the threats that we have. We need to unite, we need to secure the economy and the border, and to make sure that we invest in Canadians.
No, look, I can accept that the economy is clearly the most urgent focus for Canadians right now, especially with the threats from the United States. It would be the focus in every part of Canada, including Alberta and Prince Edward Island, who have nobody at the cabinet table. You have 4 Liberals in Prince Edward Island, there's 2 in Alberta. The convention has always been a province that has an MP, and the government does get a seat at the cabinet table. I mean, what message does that send? I know things are tough for Liberals in Alberta. They're usually not that tough in Prince Edward Island. What message do you think this sends going into an election campaign?
The message it sends is that all 24 cabinet ministers have a responsibility to all Canadians across the spectrum, across the country, and we have regional representation from the West, from Ontario, from Quebec, from Atlantic, and while we may not have every province and territory represented, we have a wide spectrum of the country represented in a way that really speaks to the need of the day.
2 cabinet ministers west of Thunder Bay, though. That's a lot of people and a big chunk of territory for Jonathan Wilkinson and Terry Duguid to represent, right? I mean, you can see the deficiency there in terms of your 14 MPs in British Columbia, for example. I mean, do you think there's going to be a cost for that?
Look, I've been to British Columbia. I stopped counting the number of times I've been there. Just in the last 3 weeks, I've been there three times. We have many cabinet ministers who routinely, as part of the work they do on a daily basis, go to different parts of the country, and with the people we have right now and with the focus on the economy, we will continue to do that.
Okay, I don't know if you watched Mr. Poilievre's press conference today. I think you might have been in the cabinet meeting when he was speaking. But when Mr. Carney was calling this Canada's new government, and it's going to be, more focused, more action-oriented, and move faster, he was making the point that this is essentially a lot of the same people in cabinet. The problems that existed when the polling was much worse for you than it is today, they're still there. Houses are too expensive, too scarce. Inflation's under control, cost of living is still up. And this is really just an attempt to change the face of the government to win a 4th Liberal mandate. How do you overcome the challenges that are still there from when your political fortunes were in much worse shape a month or so ago, because they have not gone away as we head into an election?
I've been, crisscross the country 3 times in the last 2 months. There's anxiety across the board. And people are not actually looking to Pierre Poilievre for answers. They're looking at Mark Carney for answers. They feel way more confident and optimistic, and they feel that Mark Carney is a leader that they can trust, who has the experience, who has, one of the things that the Prime Minister Carney says is that Pierre Poilievre has never had to meet a payroll. In the midst of the 2008 crisis, I opened my law office a year earlier, and I was struggling at night to make sure that every single one of my staff were paid on time. And this is what a lot of small businesses are going through. On the flip side of it, this is where a lot of the anxiety for workers lie. They don't have the luxury of a 20-year paycheck from the federal government. They have to work in the factory floor, or they have to work in the fisheries, or where they have to get paid by the private sector. And the person who has the experience to understand and to meet the moment is Prime Minister Carney, and it's not Pierre Poilievre.
The first act of the cabinet today, when they met, or at least first public act that we saw, was him signing the order to end the consumer carbon price on April 1. He's axed the tax, to use the popular term, but to keep the rebate in place. The allegation from the Conservatives is that this is just a stunt to get it through the election. Will you bring it back in any form, or is the consumer carbon tax dead forever?
The consumer carbon tax is dead. I think what is not dead in our mind is the threat of the environment, the need to ensure that the environment is protected. It is front and center for people around the country. There's wildfires. The Arctic is melting. We have erratic weather events happening across the country. So that is the existential threat that we face apart from the tariffs that as a government we have been addressing. We realized that the carbon pricing model that we had was not working. That's why Prime Minister Carney, in his first act, in his first cabinet meeting, made the decision to revoke it and to come up with a robust program that will ensure that we can meet our carbon targets. Environmental protection is center to this government and to this Prime Minister. If we fail in the environment, we fail many generations ahead of us.
Okay, one last question before I let you go, Minister. You were at Rideau Hall today. I have a pretty strong sense you may be back at Rideau Hall very soon, or at least Mark Carney will be back at Rideau Hall very soon to ask the Governor-General to dissolve Parliament and have a national election. Parliament's supposed to come back on the 24th of March. Do you think this new cabinet ever actually sits in the cabinet, in the Commons before the next election, or do you think we go to the polls sometime in the next 9 days?
Look, I will leave that to the Prime Minister to answer, but I can tell you, for me, I've been meeting with my teams already, and just given the limited time I have, I'm meeting them in cars and car rides, and my instruction is to go full steam ahead on the portfolios that both Crown and Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, as well as Justice and Attorney General, to ensure that we continue the work. We will continue to work for Canadians. This is a moment where Canadians need their government to be at its best, and we will continue to do that work.
But, you know, to this point, you have no majority. He has no seat. He's only been chosen by Liberals. It feels warranted that he would seek a mandate from Canadians very, very quickly. Am I wrong?
I think he would like to get a mandate, a strong mandate from Canadians to serve for the long term, and we have, as you know, until October of this year to have an election, and I believe that the Prime Minister will make the decision, based on a number of factors, including the threats that are ahead of us.
Minister Gary Anandasangaree, the Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, and the Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada. That's a heck of a business card you've got to fill out there. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by two people who have experience navigating the halls of Parliament and the transition to a new leader. Michelle Cadario was the Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Paul Martin, and David McLaughlin was the Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. It's good to see you both. Thanks for being here. Michelle, a very different transition than what you went through. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing here, and how would you describe what Mark Carney is facing as he takes over for Justin Trudeau?
Well, it's hard to actually just appreciate the pace that it's going at. You know, we always think of transition times when you're in the middle of it as just pressure baked, that there's such limited amount of hours to get everything done. But this has just been over accelerated. It's an overdrive. And so putting together a cabinet, putting together a government, what you want it to look like, shrinking the size of what was there, and, being very forward thinking in terms of what does my first cabinet meeting look like? What was my first announcement look like? And then my first foreign trip is within days. And so everything has just been at such a fast pace. This might only be a government that's really here for 10 days or so.
David, I watched when the transition happened in the United Kingdom, and Rishi Sunak was out of number 10 in 24 hours. And I was like, my God, that happened so fast compared to Canada. We're not quite there, but boy, this is going fast.
Yeah, this is faster. This is transition on steroids, and it has to be, given the circumstances in which the new Prime Minister and the government find themselves in. We're only weeks away, if that, from an election. So the transition, everything is accelerated for this transition. Step one, get a new cabinet in place, get yourself installed, make a few decisions that you want to put on the board to show that you're governing in the form that you want to, for style, and show you're different and change, etc. The carbon tax decision today, so that's the management of it. I was Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Mulroney during the transition to Kim Campbell. We had oodles of time
and a majority
and a majority to work with, and 2 briefcases full of documents because we didn't have emails really back then, and gave them to her at 24 Sussex and for her and her team to take away to more leisurely look at. that's not at all the pace that we're at now. So radically different circumstances.
Well, like here it is March 14th with the prorogue parliament. So David, normally at this time, they're working towards a budget.
Yes.
I don't know if we're going to see one before the election. I'd say we're not.
Probably not.
Probably not. And normally with a prorogation, you'd be working towards the throne speech. Doesn't sound like Parliament's going to come back at all. So how does that affect the transition? Because you still need a government to deal with things during the caretaker period. And with Donald Trump, you need some good caretakers.
Yes.
How do you do this and they can get ready for an election in a space of 2 weeks from winning the leadership?
Well, you have to be very brutal in your decisions as to what matters and what doesn't matter. I mean, the most important commodity any government has is the Prime Minister's time. So you're using that, you're parsing that out on a calendar basis, on a daily basis, trying to figure out to what extent does the Prime Minister need to focus on something and to what extent can the bureaucracy through the Privy Council office focus on something. So there's just stuff you hive off over to the bureaucracy, keep those things going, only bring to me the most urgent files, the most crucial files, and we know what they are. They're Trump and obviously in the economy. And then you're really transitioning with your campaign team. What Mark Carney has to work through is transitioning as Prime Minister, but he's also transitioning as Liberal leader. And in this dynamic of getting to know the party, and he's obviously gotten to know it a bit through the leadership process, but getting ready for a campaign. So he's put together a cabinet team. He also has to put together a campaign team.
Right.
And so there's two kind of transitions, and they're all competing for one important commodity, and that's the time of the Prime Minister.
Right. So on that, Michelle, I mean, if Parliament's not coming back, there's a 9-day window here where another trip happens to Rideau Hall. It seems to me the most important files from Mark Carney is what's our candidate recruitment like, how's our fundraising, and what's the platform going to look like? I mean, how do you transition to an election in what appears to be 8-9 days from now before it all starts?
Well, I think, part of given the extraordinary time that we're in, we know what the election is about, right? And I think that Canadians are looking to see and to discover who is going to be the person who can best deal with Donald Trump and to help transition our economy to be less dependent on the United States. The ballot question is fairly simple, and so I think that the platform is a much less of an issue this time. And I think that what we're talking about is really about leadership, and it's about the economy. And so it's going to be very, very focused campaign. And so again, that's very different. But yes, you have to get all of your candidates in place. You have to do all the nuts and bolts of the tour and the buses and logistics, plan out your first 10 days of your campaign. And at the same time, you have to cut your ads. You have to buy your media space. You have to kind of set out an agenda and figure out what your rhythm of your campaign is going to be. And on top of all of this, the new Prime Minister has never been through a campaign before. And so, there's that added element of everything is new. And in many ways, my belief is that's probably better. If you don't know how turbulent it might be and just what faces you ahead, you can kind of take each day by day. And I think that he certainly demonstrated a calm and a leadership following the swearing in. He might have turned in the wrong direction coming out of cabinet or trying to get into cabinet. But I think that his decision-making has been bang on and exactly what Canadians wanted to see. Okay, so David, you talked about needing to be ruthless in your decision-making. Obviously, that's something that comes into play when you're picking a cabinet. You shrunk it down quite a bit. People got left out. Provinces got left out. Yes. No one from PEI, and there's 4 Liberals, and there's 4 seats in PEI. They're all Liberals. Now, Steve McKinnon was born there, but he doesn't represent there. And there's no one in Alberta, despite Randy Boissonnault and George Chahal. I mean, what message does that send going into an election where you're going to win those seats? And, small provinces losing a big thing, it matters. So if I'm a Conservative campaign manager in PEI, I'm going to say that the Liberal Prime Minister just voted non-confidence in each of the Liberal MPs. I mean, it's a talking point to be able to say, I actually don't have confidence. They're not big enough for cabinet. They're not good enough for cabinet. And so that's a bit problematic. Alberta is a little bit more understandable, given that there's only a couple to choose from, and one of them is named Randy, right? There's brings certain certain challenges. But there is no other Randy, despite the political problems there. So there's to that extent, not having somebody from there is a bit more explainable. But in PEI, I can see, I'm from back home in Atlantic Canada, as you are, and we know that people take this very seriously. And if you look across the country, I mean, this is a radical downsizing of the cabinet relative to what we've had in the past.
Kim Campbell did it in 1993 with a massive restructuring of the roles and responsibilities of government. This is less of that. This is more just I'm shrinking and streamlining and the rest of it. So we have one member of the cabinet from British Columbia, and we have two from New Brunswick.
Right.
So I mean,
you have two west of Thunder Bay and two, between like Moncton and St. John.
There you are. So he's going to have to explain that, because there's at the end of the day, any prime minister has two essential duties: maintain the unity of the country and maintain the relationship with the United States. We know the United States we know that's blowing up, as it were. We don't need a national unity sort of, additional challenge underneath it. And even though we have some of that happening there, these are things that that tend to distract your message a bit. He'll have to work through it, but it's his job to explain it.
Michelle, how does he explain that, right? I mean, the argument today was that, people get categorized a little bit too narrowly, and, Steve McKinnon is from PEI, Mark Carney and I grew up in Edmonton, Christopher Freeland's from Peace River. All of that may be true, but they don't represent constituencies there, and I don't know if Alberta would necessarily look at Freeland as having been their representative in this particular government under Trudeau and maybe under Carney. How do you sell that when you go, and BC in particular, 14 MPs, one minister?
Well, I think that he should be upfront about it and just call it what it is. It's a transition cabinet, and I think that they're probably hoping to recruit even more people to run for them. Potentially that there's some exciting newcomers that could add to it. And if he has the chance to form another government following the election, then he will kind of reconsider some of that stuff. But this cabinet was all about making sure that when we go into an election campaign, we have the right people that are in the right roles to be able to keep the conversation open with Trump, keep everything moving that we need to keep moving in terms of the support for Canadians that they might need because of Trump, and to get to the other side. And so, I think that he's been pretty frank about that. It's true. Many of us are from all over the place and have lived in different parts of the country, and that's all a benefit to everybody around the cabinet table. The more understanding that you have from different corners of the country, the better.
Right.
But I wouldn't try and rationalize it over. I would just accept it and move on about the why. And the why was he wanted it smaller, and he wanted it very focused on what we're doing with the United States.
Okay, and I'll let David in here, but I have to ask you a question. Do you think you see keeping a cabinet seat warm for your old boss, Christy Clark, Fleetwood, Port Kells, Delta? I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you think the former BC Premier is going to run? Well,
I think we all heard her in the media last week say that she was interested. I think she'd be a phenomenal phenomenal candidate, a phenomenal MP, phenomenal cabinet minister. So I'm a little biased, so I hope that the team works hard to get her.
All right, David, quick last point.
What Prime Minister Carney did today was show stability for the Canada-U.S. file by keeping those ministers in place.
Yes.
Everything
broadly.
Else,
there was some movement, but broadly, same people.
The only change is to say I'm going to be smaller, and therefore he's trying to show that with the size of cabinet, trying to show he's different from Prime Minister Trudeau, and that's his dilemma and that's his challenge. He has to be different, but he also has to be change from the previous government. And so he's in that part of that transition is sending those messages bit by bit. Smaller cabinet is the first step, but it's clearly not going to be the governing cabinet.
Right.
If he wins re-election.
Yes, he's calling it Canada's new government, which is an interesting...
I remember that from 2006.
From 2006 with Harper, and it's promising to be faster, focused, and action-oriented. So the test will be in that. All right, we got to leave it there. Michelle Cadario, David McLaughlin, thanks so much. Good to see you both.